Are you looking for additional ways to improve your grouping strategies for reading in your classroom? How do you combat the tendency to always put kids into reading groups and have them reading the same levels? Let's talk a little bit about something called flexible grouping practices today. My name is Avia Kelly, and this is my YouTube channel, Literacy in Elementary Schools, Improving How Students Read, Write, and Communicate. So let's get to it. Flexible grouping practices is just exactly that. It's ways in which you flexibly put kids in groups based on their needs. So for example, these are temporary groups. If a group of students in your class need help with a certain skill or strategy or phonemic help, you will just put kids in those groups based on their needs. Now, when I say groups, I'm talking about numbers from about 2 to 6, and so I want to keep that in mind. And also, as I talk about needs, you're using data to drive how you're grouping your students. You're going to look at their assessments, you're going to see what areas they're struggling in, and then you'll put them in groups based on that. Now, some of these assessments don't have to be formal. You're a teacher, you can sometimes see what your students need, but it's still data driven, and you should have a reason for each group, and the students should understand what they're working on, and they should understand what it takes to exit that group. Now, couple things. When you're grouping students, you could group them sometimes based on, as I said, a skill. But every once in a while, if you wanted to mix it up and change things around, as long as you have a goal, you could still have that group. For example, you could do an interest group where your students are still working on a strategy. Let's say you have several students in your class who play soccer and they love it. You can have a group that's reading about soccer, but they're still working on a skill or a strategy that you've come up with as a teacher. Another thing you might want to think about is that these groups shouldn't be lasting a very long time. For example, you might only need a group for a couple days or maybe a couple weeks, but the idea is to keep things moving. It's flexible for that very reason. So these are some of the things you want to consider as you're grouping students. Sometimes you could even group students based on their a questionnaire. You could, or make them choose what group they want to be in, for example, and then this gives them some autonomy over their learning. So there's many different ways in which you can do this. Another thing that I wanted to touch on is that these groups don't have to be teacher-led. You can help your students lead these little group discussions, and then you can just kind of sit in or listen in on what's going on in these groups. And there might be times when there's just one student in your class who's struggling with something, and while you have everybody else in a group, you can work with another student one-on-one with a teacher-student group until you help that student. So train the students how to act in groups. That will take a little time, I know, but you can model for them and they will understand. And as long as they understand the purpose and things that they're working on, they can do it themselves. They're little people. So these are just some things you might want to think about. Be flexible. Have a certain number of students, not more than 6, not less than 2, obviously. The teacher doesn't always have to lead. It can also be by interest, even if they're working on a specific topic. And so think about it and try to incorporate some of these things in your classrooms, okay? Have fun.